Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this edition of Defense News Weekly, we're on Capitol Hill as Congress continues to grill Pentagon leaders over the future of the military. In addition, we're going to find out the impact of the coronavirus on the F-35, see the Navy's newest amphibious assault ship, and meet the new Air Force Chief of Staff. With in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to this week's edition of Defense News Weekly. I'm Jeff Martin, and it's good to be back here hosting. This week was busy on the Hill, as there were dozens of hearings, many of which were defense-related. But before we get into those, let's look at some headlines from the week. We now know who will be the next Air Force Chief of Staff, as General Charles Q. Brown, also known as CQ, who's the head of Pacific Air Forces, has been nominated to be the new Air Force uniformed leader. He'll be the first black chief of any military service, and will replace General Dave Goldfein, who is set to retire this summer. Brown is highly regarded in the Air Force and previously led Air Forces Central, as well as being the deputy commander at CENTCOM. He's an F-16 pilot and is also a weapons school grad. He still needs to be confirmed by the Senate, and a confirmation hearing will likely happen sometime this spring. And check out this video of Boeing's entry in the Army's Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft Competition, or FARA, which it unveiled today. It's a unique helicopter using 3 different types of rotor systems, including a traditional rotor, tail rotor, and pusher prop. According to Boeing, it will be able to meet the Army's speed requirements and is competing against offerings from Bell, Sikorsky, Karem, and an L3 Harris AVX team. The Army is expected to down-select 2 sometime in the coming weeks before picking a final winner later on. And coronavirus fears have caused some impacts on F-35 production overseas at the 2 final assembly lines in Italy and Japan. In Italy, Lockheed Martin and Pratt & Whitney employees have been directed to work from home, and in Japan, final assembly has been paused for a week. But Acquisition Chief Ellen Lord says it won't impact the delivery schedule. This also comes as a major defense conference in Qatar was canceled over fears of the virus. And the State Department has cleared Israel to purchase up to 8 KC-46 tankers with an estimated total price of $2.4 billion. Those aircraft would replace aging 707 tankers that Israel currently uses. They're the second foreign customer after Japan for the Pegasus, which is mired in developmental delays centering around the remote vision system used by refueling. This deal still needs to be approved by Congress, and the dollar amount is likely gonna change. And the Navy could soon add 2 more destroyers to complement the 4 already based in Rota, Spain. At a recent Senate Armed Services hearing, EUCOM Commander General Todd Walters told the panel that he wanted additional ships for missile defense and other tasks. The ships there have already been used for a lot of different things in the region, but are in need of dry docking in the next few years. But a formal decision to send 2 more ships is probably a little ways down the road. And Ingalls Shipbuilding has delivered the Navy's newest amphibious assault ship, the future USS Tripoli. The delivery took place in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and comes 54 years after the delivery of the last USS Tripoli from the same shipyard. The ship is the second of the America class, and notably doesn't have a well deck for amphibious operations, as the ship is optimized for aviation operations using the F-35B. But future ships of this class are going to have a well deck. The first of the class, the America, is deployed right now in the Pacific. And the Australian Air Force says that they'll be selling up to 46 older A and B model FA-18 Hornets to American private contractor Air USA, which plans to use the jets for adversary training. The aircraft still have to be prepped for the transfer at RAAF Williamtown, and Air USA is just one of several companies that are working to build up their aggressor fleets to train U.S. and allied pilots in air combat. There's no word on how much this is going to cost, but these jets are likely to be near the end of their service lives. And speaking of Australia, faced with a possible 2-year production pause for MQ-4C Triton drones, Northrop Grumman is offering them to Australia at a very cheap price to bridge the production gap. According to the company, the plan is to offer 5 aircraft that would be moved to the 5th production batch. Australia has a requirement for 6 of the aircraft, but only 1 on order. The proposal from Northrop Grumman would fulfill their need and fully obligate all Batch 5 aircraft. And Defense Secretary Mark Esper and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley were back on Capitol Hill this week, this time testifying to the Senate Armed Services Committee. During that hearing, Esper was questioned by Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono about the ongoing saga of a Hawaiian-based missile defense radar. Here's their exchange.
Your budget request, quote, increases missile defense capability and capacity to keep pace with adversary missile systems, end quote, while investing in a layered defense of the homeland. But, Mr. Secretary, in spite of 4 years of authorizations and 3 years of appropriations from Congress and your own 2019 missile defense review, you have zeroed out the HDR Hawaii, which is the radar for Hawaii, which is part of a system that provides layered defense of the homeland. Is this decision to zero out the funding for HDRH a decision to not build this radar at all in Hawaii?
Not necessarily, Senator. As you know, for many years now, we've had a problem with state and local authorities giving us permission to get onto that site and do what we need to do, if I recall correctly. And it seemed the latest report we had at the time building the budget is we probably wouldn't see any resolution for another year or 2 or 3.
So does that mean that we can expect you to request, I'm very familiar with certain delays with regard to the siting. So does this mean that we can expect a request of money for the HDRH in fiscal year 22?
I think when we see a light at the end of the tunnel with regard to getting clearance to build, yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's good to know. And because otherwise the decision to zero out the HDRH and reprioritizing the funds from DOD's #1 priority region, as you say, for another purpose really doesn't make sense. And I'd also like to have a commitment from you now that you will not seek to repurpose F-20 funding for this radar that is still being used to continue the HDRH Hawaii contract.
Senator, I'm not sure I can make that commitment because I'm not sure I fully understand what you're asking. But again, what we're trying to do is, in the era of tight budgets, make sure we don't put money against something that has no possibility of being affected in the near term.
Well, I don't know what you mean by the near term because
this
radar is part of a system and was supposed to be pretty much operational by 2023, which means that it's, aside from the delays that I understand that's occurred, we're supposed to be on track because that's what the National Defense Strategy calls for. So in 2020, there was some $188 million. This is being expended even as we speak. So I would like to know that you are not going to repurpose this funding that's already there
Well, Senator, if I recall,
for other purposes.
Yes, ma'am. If I recall the issue properly, it's developing of the system is one thing, but if I develop a system and I can't put it somewhere that it has no effect, it's wasted money.
Well, you know that this contract is, as far as I know, Lockheed Martin is already building this radar. So there's already a contract for them. This thing was supposed to be, in effect, operational in 2023. So if we don't go ahead with this, I think that you're going to have some contractual things to deal with. But, you know, what I'm hearing from you is, aside from the delays that were caused by the sighting, mainly of this radar, that you have a commitment to pursue the radar and have it built in Hawaii as part of our system, missile defense system.
I'm making a commitment to you that we, of course, intend to defend all 50 United States and territories with radars and effectors as necessary. What I need to come back to you with is a better understanding where things lie. It's one thing to build a radar, but if I invest hundreds of $millions in the radar and then I cannot place it somewhere, then it's wasted money.
Of course, I realize that. That's not what I'm asking. Thank you.
On the other side of Capitol Hill, Air Force leaders were in front of the House Armed Services Committee discussing the changes proposed in this year's budget. One topic that kept coming up, though, was continuing issues with that KC-46 tanker, and lawmakers were very eager to find out what they could.
The common tension that you will always see between a combatant commander that has a near-term requirement and a service chief that's building a force to win in 2030. And so we could have the same discussion about tankers, fighters, bombers, command and control, ISR. So in the tanker business, two options, two things I want to tell you. First of all, if we go to war into a high-end fight in terms of mitigation, we have already told the combatant command and the Secretary of Defense that we would put every KC-46 into a high-end fight.
Even
we
though
would
it
not
doesn't work?
use it for day-to-day operations, but you'd use it for high-end combat operations. What we're asking for is a 3% retirement, representing 3% of the KC-135 fleet. And so we're working through that with the Secretary of Defense now, but it's a reasonable trade.
Thank you.
And you have a 25% failure rate on the.
Actually, if I could ask this question, the comment under his breath there that I think you missed was the notion that the KC-46 fundamentally doesn't work. I think that's actually an important question to address before we move on. Does it have problems or does it fundamentally not work?
So we're having significant issues with the remote visual system. It's a hardware problem that requires a hardware fix. I sent a letter to the CEO, Mr. Calhoun. He came to see me 3 days later. We sat down. He committed to me that this is his #1 priority for getting this back on track. I've seen a different behavior from that company since he's taken over. We're on final, so I want to be careful about negotiations, but we think we have a good fix.
Of the many issues in your portfolio, getting a clear picture as to how we get the KC-46 to actually function like it's supposed to is a pretty big one. So we'll definitely, I know Mr. Norcross will definitely be following up with you on that as well.
But as said, and you mentioned it earlier, in a high-end fight, we could use the 46s. Describe to us what a high-end fight looks like.
Sir, if we would go to a high-end contingency fight, either a peer fight or one where the Secretary of Defense asked me whether in high-end combat operations, whether I would be comfortable using the KC-46, I would take that risk. We've already done the operational analysis and we would do that. We will not take that risk during day-to-day operations. And it has to do, quite frankly, with the remote visual system that very quickly, the last 10 feet, when the boom operator is trying to plug the receiver, the system was not designed well in terms of that final focus. So we're having more out of contacts around the airplane. I would take that risk in combat. I would not take that risk in day-to-day operations.
I know the issue of the remote visual system has been brought up by other members. I'm not going to belabor the point. I just want to, again, emphasize that as we get closer to markup on the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee, we have to make a decision about building more planes that we know are going to have to be fairly significantly retrofitted. So to the extent that, this comes to a conclusion in terms of what that retrofit looks like, frankly, it would, I think, just make for common sense budgeting so that we know, what we're paying for.
Another tense exchange during the hearing was over the A-10 Warthog, as Arizona Democrat Ruben Gallego was not happy with plans to retire a few older airframes. Here's what he told Air Force Chief General Dave Goldfein.
If we need proven capable aircraft, why is the Air Force announcing the intent to retire 44 A-10 Warthogs without giving us more details?
The A-10 story, I'll tell you that, as I said yesterday in the SAS, Senator McSally and many others have done a great job really saving the A-10. So the A-10 is going to fly well through the 2030s. We're putting almost $1 billion into the A-10, updating its wings, updating its avionics, updating its radios. There is no better platform for close air support, and we're going to keep that into the 2030s.
So then, okay, I get what you're saying, Joe, and so that's why I'm confused. So why we're planning to retire then if we're putting this much investment in them? The 44.
Because we're fleet managing, sir, across the fleet. KC-135s, KC-10s, Global Hawks, A-10s, right? We're taking the oldest airframes that are unaffordable to keep flying, and then putting that money and that manpower back in the existing system and buying new technology.
But also just wanted to point out that we have been very clear, as in Congress, specifically the House Armed Services Committee through the 2017 NDAA, that there is not to be any reduction of the A-10 until there is a study between the F-35 and the A-10. And that study is coming out when?
Sir, that study is complete. I've talked to the director of OT&E. It's actually, he's prepared to offer that as an interim report, but he's right now planning on delivering that in September with the full IOT&E report on the F-35.
But the 2017 NDA says that you do not do any movement, any decision on the A-10 until you come and deliver that report. Right now, you've made a decision without delivering us the report. So, in my opinion, you're in violation of the 2017 NDA. Is that not, what else should I take from that?
Well, sir, we had this discussion yesterday as well with the SASC. When we looked through it and looked at the language, given that we were going to give you the report on the first month of the fiscal year and the timing that is laid out in the law, there is actual time between the end of the FIDEP to conclude this. But I will tell you, we understand the law and we will follow it.
Okay. Now, I understand that there has been a change in the plan from the first initiation or the first release of the plan. And yesterday, when you were talking on the Senate side, that you guys have a new plan for the A-10. So what is the details of this new plan?
So the only plan we have right now is the one that's in the President budget. I'll be happy to get with you offline on this dialogue that we're having.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also, be sure to add us on Apple's News app and other platforms for the latest updates. Now, when we come back, we're going to hear Army leaders discuss their plans for missile defense and get an update on hypersonic weapons development. Also in front of the House Armed Services Committee this week was Army Chief of Staff General James McConville. During that hearing, he was questioned about the Army's plans for air and missile defense in the coming years. Here's what he had to say.
Now, the Army has procured 2 Iron Dome systems as a result of this NDAA requirement. So it seems that while the Army continues to evaluate this enduring indirect fire protection capability, The Iron Dome capability appears to be a battle-proven system and a known quantity and is something we have on hand. Could you please update this committee on the status of the Army's plans for indirect fire protection capability, which is very justified and is a threat that we face? And does the Army have plans to procure an additional 2 batteries of Iron Dome, and how does Iron Dome fit into these plans?
Yes, Congressman, and first of all, very concerned about the indirect fire and really the threat to our soldiers from any type of system, whether it's unmanned aerial systems, it's theater ballistic missiles. And where the Army's going is right now, as you've said, we went ahead and have purchased 2 Iron Dome batteries. They are standalone static batteries to provide a certain capability. They are combat proven. But where the Army's going to is a layered defense for air and missile defense. We see that in the future as something we're very concerned about. We want to be able to tie every sensor to shooter. The way we see the future is multiple radars will be tied into a integrated battle command system, which will be able to apply the appropriate shooter or response to whatever that threat is. And that response could be directed energy, which we're working on right now. It could be high-powered microwave, which we're working on right now. It could be some type of gun system, which we have the capability to do right now. It could be a missile system at the lower and higher level, which you want to do. But what we don't want to do is be in a position where we're shooting Patriot missile systems or even larger missile systems at small unmanned aerial systems where the value analysis doesn't work out. So we're not, as we talk to Iron Dome and they bring it on board, we're going to get a chance to get our soldiers on board. We are broadcasting the type of system that we want and what we need in the future, and we want them to compete along with other U.S. companies that want to compete for this long-term capability.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to seeing how that continues to fit into the evolving plans. I think it's a very proven and critical defense. And secondly and lastly, for both of you, I want to ask about the current strength of our Patriot and THAAD forces. A recent Army study increased the THAAD battery requirement from 7 batteries to 8. But this 8th battery was not in the Army's fiscal 21 year budget request and can only be found in the Missile Defense Agency's unfunded priority list. I know we're investing in a new Patriot radar and other modernization initiatives. However, THAAD and Patriot batteries are among the most deployed units in the military. And I'm concerned that we might be spread too thin. And this was brought to the attention of the American public when our soldiers in Iraq were targeted by a ballistic missile attack recently. Do you feel the Army has the missile defense force structure to meet current global requirements?
I think the Army has what it needs because it has what it has right now, and if we innovatively employ those systems, we have what we need. We are taking a look, again, getting to how we work in the future. When we take a look at places like the Middle East, how do we work with partners that have Patriot capability that can defend themselves? And what we're looking at in some cases when it comes to air and missile defense is advising and assisting our partners so they use their capability to defend their bases and their critical infrastructure, and that we can use our systems to take care of our soldiers and our bases is where we want to go in that. Now, the secret, though, at least from, not the secret, but the end state for us is really tying in multiple sensors with multiple shooters, and THAAD and Patriot are part of that equation.
Don't go away. When we come back, we'll get an update on hypersonic weapons development. On this week's Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack offers her latest tips.
If you have no credit or are trying to improve your credit score, using a credit card responsibly will help. But wait, you're saying, how can I get a credit card when I don't have credit or my credit's bad? It may sound like a catch-22, but it's not. The secret to getting a credit card and establishing or repairing credit is the trusty secured credit card. It's an effective way to build your great credit while also learning credit and debt management skills. Then once you're ready, you can more confidently and successfully apply for a credit card. Once you do get a debt revolving credit card, you'll need to put those new skills in action. As a consumer, you should keep your credit score and credit history impeccable, which means keeping your debt low and your payments on time. How much you use of your available credit matters. The general rule is to stay below 30%. Say you have $1,000 in a credit limit. With a balance of $300, that means you're using 30%. Anything higher can decrease your credit score and make lenders think you might not repay new debt. You can keep your usage lower and pay debt down faster by paying more than the minimum each month. As your credit limits increase and your usage stays low, you'll see a serious boost to your credit score, which comes with serious buying power. After all, you've earned it.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com and subscribe to the Early Bird Brief, delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start the day. And don't go away. When we come back, we're going to get an update on hypersonic weapons development. If you listen to anyone in Washington, hypersonic weapons are the in-demand topic right now. So recently, two of the officials leading that effort for the Pentagon spoke to reporters to give them an update on how things are going. Here's what they had to say about development of air-launched missiles.
Arrow is supposed to be based on the TBG, and they're operating in parallel. How does Arrow learn from TBG if it's actually a little ahead?
Do you want to take the?
Sure. Dr. Roper's comments on Friday really described the difficult decision that the Air Force had to make in stopping Hacksaw at the CDR, which is later this month. And that decision really was budget-driven. Ideally, the Air Force made a very aggressive, lean-forward decision a couple years ago to not only put one hypersonic program in place, transitioning from the S&T world to a weapon prototype world, but to realize that involved risks and to put a second one in place in case those risks were realized. Both systems have been matured, and we're in the process of taking those systems up to CDR level of development, and the Air Force made a difficult budget decision in 21 that basically said, hey, the envisioned desired system is associated with TBG and Arrow. We need to place our bet now, and then we'll wrap Hacksaw off, put it on a shelf, and be able to pull it off if we need it, but we want to focus our energies on Arrow to make sure that that's successful.
I should point out it was a decision that we in RNA fully supported. We think the Air Force made the right technical decision as well. I mean, given the constraints that they had picking between their systems, they made the right technical decision. Now, having said that, you raise a great question, which is that Arrow is leveraging efforts under the DARPA TBG program. And we've got really good connectivity now between DARPA and the Air Force to make sure that they're working hand in glove. That DARPA understands the importance of what they're doing and how it factors into the Air Force activities. And that's something that we in R&E are really quite focused on.
So if I could quickly follow up, then. He also mentioned the idea of having dual producers and competitive procurement later on.
Yeah.
Are you talking about taking one design and giving it to two companies to produce, or are you thinking about a slightly different variation of the idea?
So we're not really talking about one design and multiple producers yet. We're talking about variations on the idea. In part, I'll come back to, we're doing flight experiments, and we want to have a range of options available for the various systems we might pursue.
That's all we've got time for this week, but if you want to see and read more, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.